boat. Bon voyage.
Hey there guys, this is Richard, your host, with another marvellous video. This time, top 50 cartoons of the 80s, the golden era of Saturday morning shows. If you've lived through the Saturday mornings in the 80s, you've witnessed an era that was nothing short of revolutionary in terms of quality cartoon shows. Some of the finest animated shows were created in the course of the 80s, and it was the best feeling in the world to grab an overflowing bowl of cereal and chips and station ourselves in front of the TV to enjoy our favourite cartoon shows. In this video, we pay our tributes to some good old nostalgia as we bring you the top 50 finest shows from the golden era of cartoons. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Thundercats, 1985. The planet Thundera is inhabited by a population of humanoid cats, but when their home planet is destroyed, they all seek out a safe residence. However, as they try evacuating the planet in their escape ships, a band of evil mutants destroys every one of those spaceships. Only one manages to survive, and it brings a small group of Thunderans to the third Earth. The evil forces of Mumra follow them to their new home, and the surviving Thundercats must design a solid defense under their leader, Lion-O. The ruthless battle between good and evil forces begins, and it remains to be seen if these enthusiastic fighters stand a chance against a superior enemy. It's surprising that such a promising show didn't find confidence from the showrunners who delayed the release for almost 2 years after the first season was ready. The fantasy show, with loads of action and adventure, immediately found a steady audience, and even the adults enjoyed the episodes as much as the kids. It was an intriguing concept backed by detailed animation techniques, and the theme tune remains one of the most memorable sounds from the 80s for many. The show had some amazing characters, and the mysterious villain Mumra proved to be the perfect antagonist. Overall, Thundercats offered an exciting storyline combined with solid entertainment, and kids nowadays will never know the true magic of such brilliance back in the day. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, 1987. This animated series was premised in New York City, where a group of powerful mutant turtles fought all forms of evil, led by the likes of Shredder and Krang. 4 turtles were transformed into humanoids and then trained as a ninja to fight crime in New York City. They lived in the sewers and emerged in times of crisis to show off their incredible fighting skills. The source comics were considerably darker, but the show toned things down to suit the young audience. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles became an integral part of pop culture, and the toy sales went through the roof. One of the main reasons behind this massive popularity was the show, which set things up nicely for the franchise. The pizza-eating ninja fighters with unique personalities were adored by the kids, and collecting action figures became a religion for an entire generation. The dialogues were packed with catchy one-liners, and no one seemed to mind the mild continuity issues that can be observed. The fast-paced narrative ensured that the show retained the attention of the kids, and the simplistic plots with silly humor were the perfect package to market to a young audience. Besides some incredible animation, the show was also backed by some genuinely talented voice actors, and it's easily among the best cartoon shows during the 80s. HeMan and the Masters of the Universe, 1983. You simply can't go wrong with the adventures of the most powerful man in the universe, HeMan. After the grand success of the toy line, an animated series was just waiting to happen, and in 1983, the release of the much-awaited HeMan and the Masters of the Universe did not disappoint. It revolved around the exploits of HeMan and his allies as they battle to save the planet Eternia, and the secrets of Castle Grayskull from the evil forces of Skeletor and his minions. The wimpy and annoying Prince Adam transformed into a majestic superhero, and together with Man-at-Arms, Teela, and his mighty Battle Cat, he took on the enemy forces in each episode. Fantasy shows simply don't get much better than this, and if you haven't watched this series, it's high time you went back and enjoyed the show. Everything from the larger-than-life characters, the storyline, and the gallant villains demand your attention, and the abundance of colors made things interesting for children as well. The remake of the series in 2002 was also an impressive attempt, but you simply can't deny the charms of the original. The voiceovers came from a limited number of people, but their skills were so versatile that you'll never notice any similarities. Besides entertaining kids through the episodes, the show also provided some value education, and unlike a few other shows of the time, it never promoted violence or bad behavior. In many ways, HeMan changed 80s cartoons for the better, and those who have watched the show will know exactly what we're talking about.
G.I. Joe is the code name for America's daring, highly trained special mission.
G.I. Joe, a real American hero, 1983. The fearless Special Forces team G.I. Joe works all over the world to keep the people safe from the evil organization Cobra. The Cobra Commander wants to control the entire world, and the only thing standing between his goals is the special team of fighters who are capable of fighting anywhere at any time. The episodes are largely focused on these missions as trouble breaks out every now and then to challenge the heroes who must save the day. Those who are purists when it comes to cartoon shows will appreciate the raw goodness that goes into shows like G.I. Joe. It created the perfect premise, and the villainous Cobra organization left no stone unturned to make life difficult for the heroes. They were armed to the teeth and also had some super cool gadgets and new technology to challenge the safety of the world. There was plenty of action on offer, and it was thrilling to watch the G.I. Joe members fight using their special moves and skills. The animation was quite impressive for the time, and characters like Snake Eyes, Storm Shadow, Destro, and many others will remain etched in our memories forever. If you've watched this show religiously as a kid, your childhood surely has been memorable.
Comes a legend. The legend of Voltron, defender of the universe.
Voltron, 1984. The 80s was the era of over-the-top action and space battles, and Voltron was one such entertaining addition to the list. The story was premised around 5 lion robots and their brave pilots who defended the galaxy and planet Arus. The evil forces of King Zarkon and Prince Lotor of Planet Doom posed a constant threat to their existence, but their tireless battles continued irrespective of the odds stacked against them. It'd be safe to say that Voltron, Defender of the Universe, was among the best robot cartoons around, and even today the storylines will thrill and entertain you just the same. The transformation scenes were absolutely crazy, and to watch the lions become Voltron was a sight to remember. The animation was spectacular, and the show will also be appreciated by the anime fans out there. There were some campy elements in the stories and dialogues, but kids watching cartoons in the 80s hardly ever cared about such trivial flaws. We connected immensely to some of the characters in the show, and the action-packed episodes never allowed a dull moment. There have been a few incarnations of this show, but nothing beats the unadulterated fun of the 80s. Transformers, 1984. The battle between the Autobots and Decepticons has become so popular over the years that almost 40 years later, we're still excited for the upcoming live-action movie. Back in the 80s, things were way simpler, but the charm was no less than it is now. The storyline revolved around the 2 opposing factions of transforming robots, whose iconic battle would decide the fate of the Earth. It all started after the Great Cybertronian War, after which both the Autobots and Decepticons crash-landed on Earth. While the Decepticons wanted to rob the Earth of its energy resources, the Autobots sought to protect the inhabitants, a concept that made for some nail-biting episodes over the years. The finest cartoon shows always have something for both adults and kids, and this one was no exception. The vivid and detailed animation made it fun to watch the robots in action, and everything came with a healthy dose of some wonderful catchy music. It's hard to believe that the show is almost 40 years old because the concepts and story arcs still seem fresh, and the voice actors deserve special credit for bringing the characters to life. Megatron in particular was a showstopper, and of course, Optimus Prime was a crowd favorite as well. In this animated series, you'll get to witness some of the iconic Transformers who never made it to the live-action movies. The show was greatness personified, and even modern-day special effects can't match up to the delightful animation of the 80s.
SpiderMan and his amazing friends, Iceman and Firestar.
SpiderMan and his amazing friends, 1981. The friendly neighborhood superhero can be seen in a new avatar in this animated series as the web-slinger takes on crime in New York City. However, this time Spider-Man is not alone, and he's joined by 2 other superheroes, Iceman and Firestar. They form an alliance called the Spider Friends, and together they take down some of the notorious Spider-Man villains. The trio also fights against some notable Marvel villains like the Red Skull, and the crossover extends to bring in some other popular superheroes as well as the fight against evil heats up. This animated series offers a much-needed, light-hearted take on Spider-Man, which can be perfect for kids. The humor in the narrative strikes a fine balance with the action-packed moments, and it's fun to watch the guest superheroes like Captain America and Iron Man in action every now and then. The voice actors have done a wonderful job bringing in some emotion to the characters, and their efforts make the superheroes more relatable. Some changes were made from the original comics, where Firestar is 10 years younger than Iceman and Spider-Man, but since they're shown going to school together, such changes were essential. It doesn't affect the quality of the show, and purely from an entertainment perspective, Spider-Man and his amazing friends hardly puts a foot wrong. Inspector Gadget, 1983. He might be an international police inspector, but Inspector Gadget is not the finest crime fighter in business. He's up against the sinister organization MAD and their vicious leader, Dr. Claw. But the baddies always seem to be one step ahead of him. True to his name, Inspector Gadget makes use of some innovative tools, but everything from his helicopter hat to his extendable arms fails more often than not. The only bits of success that he tastes are courtesy of his intelligent niece Penny and her dog, but the inept inspector takes all the credit for their hard work. It's probably evident from the plotline itself that Inspector Gadget isn't meant to be taken seriously. The stories rely more on comedy than on action, but there are still some memorable fight sequences in various episodes. Each episode has a similar theme, where Inspector Gadget is assigned a case and he fails hopelessly, only to take credit for the masterful work of his niece. However, he's still a lovable character, just like most others that you see on the show. The voice acting adds a lot of value, and the juvenile style of animation actually works for the storyline. The movies on Inspector Gadget might have been underwhelming, but this slice of 80s cartoon is sure to win your heart. The Real Ghostbusters, 1986. Following the popularity of the motion picture, the animated series followed, and we got to see the Ghostbusters back in action yet again. The likes of Peter Venkman, Winston Zeddemore, Ray Stantz, and Egon Spengler are still hunting down demons, ghosts, and curses to keep the city safe. They have a whole new arsenal of weapons, and some unlikely help from their old nemesis Slimer as they go about their ghost hunting business. If you want to be a part of their adventures, you have to check out this entertaining series. If a popular movie franchise is adapted into an animated series, this is exactly how good you'd expect things to be. The same characters are back with a new legion of evil ghosts who need to be exterminated. And the brilliance of the storylines will keep you engaged. Some of the episodes brought in mythical creatures and introduced their own take on certain fairy tales. The humor in the narrative was top-notch, and the effects used, along with the spooky music, worked wonderfully for the show. The voice acting was great as well. And the writers of the show didn't consider the audience to be a bunch of dimwits. Each story had an intelligent twist, and The Real Ghostbusters rightly became one of the coolest cartoon shows during the 80s. The Simpsons, 1989. When we think of some of the finest animated sitcoms, The Simpsons is one of the first names that comes to mind. This satirical show focused on the adventures of a working-class dysfunctional family comprising of Homer, the beer-loving father, his homemaker wife Marge, their underachieving 10-year-old Bart, the 8-year-old genius Lisa, and an adorable infant Maggie. The Simpson family is politically incorrect, and Homer works for a nuclear power plant that runs on questionable ethics. The episodes explore their wacky exploits, and the narrative is never short on some intelligent humor. You could love the show or care little about the content, but there's no way to ignore the brilliance of the narrative. The creativity of the script is pure genius, and it's one of the shows that can be looked back 100 years later to study how life used to be back in the day. The stories only became better with time, and people enjoyed the multiple pop culture references and subtle comedy. The colorful and fluid animation is fantastic to watch, and it makes the visual jokes appealing as well. The voice acting team for The Simpsons was indeed a special talent, and when Phil Hartman, the voice behind characters like Lionel Hutz and Troy McClure, was murdered, the showrunners retired the characters instead of casting someone else. Over the years, network greed might have compromised the quality of the show, but it still remains one of the highlights of 80s cartoon shows, marking the entry into the 90s. Mask, 1985. Mask focused on the traditional good versus evil on a large scale, and the story revolved around the titular group of secret agents who have to protect the Earth against a notorious criminal organization, Venom. The leader of Venom, Miles Mayhem, has dreams of world domination, and his evil minions will do just about anything to accomplish his goals. Mask, led by Matt Tracker, must make the best use of his capable crime fighters and fleet of hidden function vehicles to take down the criminals before it's too late. Sometimes simplicity produces wonderful results, and Mask is a great example of how that can be accomplished. Every episode brought in the same overall storyline, but the viewers never got bored because of the diversity of the plot. This show was one of the pioneers in the animation business, featuring crime-fighting story arcs. Every character in the organization specialized in a specific task, and it was fun to watch their super cool vehicles in action. Planes turned into helicopters, and racing cars could fly, basically bringing in all our childhood fantasies on screen. The narrative is action-packed, and the polished artwork will make it worthwhile if you check out this hidden gem of the 80s.
Whatever the challenge, they are ready. The Centurions!
The Centurions, 1986. The story is premised in the 21st century, where humans and machines coexist and interact with each other. Humans are more developed than ever before, and some reside in outer space as well. However, trouble starts brewing when a human-machine hybrid, Doc Terror, intends to use machines to conquer the human world. Luckily for humanity, an elite team of man-machine units called the Centurions serve as the last line of defense. They're equipped with high-tech exoframe suits, and these fighting machines use a variety of advanced weapons to keep Doc Terror and his evil minions at bay. This cartoon series symbolizes everything that the 80s stood for. It provided fast and disposable fun that could be consumed by the kids. And it would be unfair to dub this as just another advertisement to glorify the toy line. The stories were thoughtful and entertaining, and the narrative had everything from thrill to adventure. It's a gentle reminder of the brilliant work done by the Ruby Spears company, which flourished during the 80s. The show might not have done well outside the 80s, but back in the day, it was fun to watch the campy wit, excessive explosions, and non-stop action. If you want some cheesy goodness as a guilty pleasure, this is the series to check out. The Incredible Hulk, 1982. The show might have run for a solitary season back in the 80s, but it still had a long-lasting impact on many die-hard Marvel fans. This animated series tells the story of a brilliant research scientist, Bruce Banner, who has the curse or the blessing to turn into a gigantic green-skinned monster with incredible strength. Luckily for us, he fights for the right side and takes down evil forces. All Dr. Banner needs is some anger for his transformation to begin, and he spells doom for the opponents in no time. Many Marvel enthusiasts go as far as to call this the best Hulk animated series ever made. That's quite a statement, considering that this cartoon series is a low-budget effort that often reused some of the stock footage for the transformations. However, there's still plenty to like about this show. Firstly, Dr. Bruce Banner is shown as a tough guy, unlike his comic book version. The stories brought about some very interesting situations, and the decent animation made things visually appealing for the viewer. One unique thing that you'll notice about this show is how Dr. Banner's clothes reappear on him after the transformations, something that you don't see in other versions of the Hulk. Michael Bell delivers the perfect Hulk voice, and it's a tragedy that the show was cancelled way too soon. Silver Hawks, 1986. In this intergalactic animated series, all hell breaks loose after a notorious space gangster, Monstar, breaks free from his confines in the penal planet. The other sections of the galaxy are threatened by him running free, and it's up to an elite team of cyborgs to ensure the safety of the universe. This group of wonderful bionic fighters is called Silverhawks, and it's the universe's last hope against the notorious gang of Monstar and their incredible powers. This old-fashioned campy animated series is probably not the finest hour of 80s cartoon, but those who watch the show will agree about the enigmatic charm in the narrative. It was basically another superhero squad story with a twist, but the narrative never got monotonous during its short run. You have to judge such a show on its own merits, and one shouldn't really complain about how the science is wildly inaccurate. It's a cartoon show, for God's sake. One of the finest assets of the show was the unique Rogues Gallery, and while Monstar can be called a Mum-Ra ripoff, it still threatened the young viewers just as much. Overall, Silverhawks is an underrated gem from the 80s that deserved more appreciation than it received, and we'd love for a nice modern-day reboot to revitalize the franchise.
Thundar, the Barbarian.
Thundar the Barbarian, 1980. The sword and sorcery genre never found a greater audience than it did in the 80s, and Thundar the Barbarian is a great example of how the concept crept into the animated world as well. The story focuses on a post-apocalyptic Earth that's been destroyed after the ozone layer is damaged due to a comet passing by. The world has descended into savagery and sorcery, and evil magicians and scavengers rule the planet. To fight these sinister forces, we have the mighty Thundar, a brave barbaric warrior with a massive sword. He makes his way through this strange world accompanied by a few allies, and their adventures make up the exciting episodes in this short-running show. Once again, this was a show that offered something that's inherently lacking in today's cartoons, some good old-fashioned fun. We couldn't care less about the qualitative flaws because the fantastic stories never failed to entertain. Thundar fighting wizards, monsters, and other forms of evil was always exciting to watch, and the narrative focused purely on action more than anything else. Some people complain that the show borrowed heavily from the existing sci-fi ideas, but so did Star Wars, and no one had issues with that. If you want to witness sword and sorcery at its finest, combining great characters with an imaginative setting, this is the show to watch out for.
Ladies and gentlemen, Garfield and Friends.
Garfield and Friends, 1988. The series is largely focused on the antics and exploits of the titular Garfield, who's a lazy feline whose sole purpose in life is to eat good food and make life difficult for his canine partner, Odie. Their owner, John, is hopelessly single, and together they get into various troubles and adventures. The narrative is largely reliant on a satirical comedy, and you can be assured of some catastrophic humor coming your way. The Garfield comic series was already a sensation, and it was about time that an animated series found its way to the Saturday morning slot. Garfield and Friends didn't disappoint and retained the comical essence of the characters that made them popular in the first place. In many ways, the satirical bit showed the way to future animated shows such as Family Guy and The Simpsons. The show wasn't afraid to take digs on some major issues, and there was an infamous episode where they made fun of NBC for their poor quality of shows. The animation was lively, and even today, the show seems as fresh as yesterday because the content was so much ahead of its time. Shira, Princess of Power, 1985. The grand success of HeMan meant that spin-offs were always on the cards, and Shira confirmed our expectations. While HeMan was largely focused on a young male fanbase, this animated series targeted young girls, with a powerful female protagonist. The titular hero, Shira, is Princess Adora, who transforms into a gallant warrior by wielding her magic sword. She grew up on Eternia and fought for the wrong side until her long-lost twin brother Prince Adam told her about her real origins. She was the daughter of King Randor and Queen Marlena. She then started fighting the forces she once fought for, and her goal becomes defeating the evil Horde so that Eternia is free from its wrath. If you think that the male fanbase of HeMan didn't take much interest in Shira and her adventures, you'd be mistaken. The show became a huge hit, and just like HeMan and many other promising 80s cartoon shows, the narrative explored the fantasy genre to the fullest. The evil Hordak was a pretty badass villain, and his duels with Shira were quite iconic. The show enjoyed the support of some decent animation design and relatable characters, and it borrowed heavily from Wonder Woman to appeal to the fans. The violence is comparatively toned down for this one, but you wouldn't be complaining much, courtesy of a vibrant storyline in almost all the episodes.
Wow, neat!
Give me a break.
I don't like this!
Dungeons and Dragons, 1983. It can be quite tricky to bring a popular game into the folds of an animated series, but the makers succeeded, and Dungeons & Dragons enjoyed a good run for 3 seasons. The story is about a group of young teenagers who are accidentally transported into the magical realm of Dungeons & Dragons, following a roller coaster ride at an amusement park. Their goal is to find their way back home, and the Dungeon Master in this magical realm gives them each a magical item to help them in their task. The realm also has an evil wizard Venger, who wants to utilize the magical items and powers possessed by the children, and there's the 5-headed dragon Tiamat, whom even Venger fears. Can the children get back home through this treacherous terrain and magical threats? Dungeons & Dragons might have been a short-lived cartoon series, but it never failed to entertain while it lasted. The characters had a lot more depth to them than you would expect, and the animation style, while unique, took a little getting used to. The tone of the narrative is darker than most other 80s cartoon shows that you've known, and the bittersweet endings to the episodes were often thought-provoking. The voice acting for the series took things to the next level, and the show wouldn't have been the same without their efforts. The only terrible thing about this show is how it was ended abruptly by Fox, and the fans never got the closure they deserved. If you're a fan of the game, this animated show will be a treat for you, along with some good old 80s style animation.
All right, Beetlejuice.
Recognize me, huh? What gave me away?
Beetlejuice, 1989. This animated series was loosely based on the film of the same name, and the story takes you on an adventure alongside a young girl named Lydia. She's fascinated by all things spooky and morbid, and everyone from her family and friends are concerned about her choices. In order to introduce some thrill into her life, she takes the help of her best friend Beetlejuice, a wild ghost from Netherworld, and the wily prankster ensures that she's never short on entertainment. Immediately after its release, Beetlejuice went on to become a great success, and it was hailed as one of the first cartoons that aired on the Fox Channel's Fox Kids lineup. The animated show introduced some changes from the movie, but the changes can be ignored in favor of the fascinating storyline. The references to pop culture are tough to miss, and the series features some great animation with some really mature jokes. The writing is top-notch, and it's backed up by some remarkable performances by the voice artists. Beetlejuice is ripe for a reboot in the modern-day cartoon apocalypse, and it would be fun to witness this charming and offbeat cartoon show all over again.
Mystic man from afar, champion of justice, Marshal Bravestar.
Bravestar, 1987. Welcome to the Wild West planet of New Texas. This hostile terrain is governed by a Native American marshal, Bravestar, who acts as the lawman in the region. He has some generous allies in the form of his talking horse and Deputy Fuzz, and together they take on the Outlaws. One of the most notorious criminals here is the leader of the Carrion Bunch, an organization that seeks to take the mineral Kyrian for themselves, and Bravestar has the task of keeping peace in New Texas, fighting these thugs to ensure justice. This animated series has a significant historic value because it's the last cartoon produced by Filmation, an iconic organization in the cartoon industry. Their last work was another reminder of their brilliance, as this action-packed series never allowed a dull moment. The premise of futuristic Western characters was fun to watch, and the show dared to be a lot bolder than most others during the time. It captured some adult concepts and crimes, and the animation quality is more than reasonable. Overall, the series remains a fun childhood memory for many, and the exploits of the unconventional hero Bravestar are enjoyable even today. Mr. T, 1983. The titular character, Mr. T, is the protagonist of the show and a coach of a gymnastics team. However, he does a lot more than his job demands when he takes on global mysteries during his travels with his team. He has some capable team members, such as Woody, Robin, Kim, and Jeff, and in a typical Scooby-Doo fashion, they fight crime and embark on various adventures. Every time they're touring for a competition, they seem to run into all sorts of crooks and thugs, and their investigations are just as entertaining as the characters. Many cartoon purists will tell you that Mr. T, although criminally underrated, is one of the milestone animated shows from the 80s. The episodes mostly follow a set pattern, but the stories always have plenty to keep you interested. It was fun to watch the real live Mr. T in the end, who would come up with a moral lesson for the kids. It was a role model for kids to learn from, and the parents never really opposed them watching the show. However, the stories never get too preachy, and there's always enough comic relief and actions to make sure that the viewers have a fun time. Some might consider this to be a silly cartoon show, but for us, it's a highly valued childhood memory.
Lord of the jungle, the hero who stalks. The beast call him brother, the ghost who walks.
Defenders of the Earth, 1986. Some of the finest superhero animated shows might have come in the 90s, but the groundwork was laid by shows like this during the 80s. Defenders of the Earth featured 4 iconic comic book heroes who allied together to fight the threat of Ming the Merciless. Flash Gordon, the Phantom, Mandrake the Magician, and his assistant Lothar form a formidable team against the villainous forces. As Ming the Merciless plans to take over the world, they put up the resistance that's expected from the finest saviors of the planet. Characters like Flash Gordon and the Phantom need no introduction, and they were already popular among the children before the show was released. This animated series added to the existing fan base because now the superheroes had jumped from the pages of the comic books into the TV screens. The episodes featured some nail-biting, high-voltage action that was loved by the viewers, and the animation quality left nothing to complain about. In typical 80s cartoon style, every episode would explore new ways for the superhero team to foil the evil plans of Ming the Merciless. And even in the simplicity of things, the show never became monotonous. The show is admittedly cheesy, but no one seemed to mind that against the plentiful entertainment on offer.
We mean you no harm, my huge friend.
Dino Riders, 1988. It was intended as a promotional show for a toy line, but the quality was much better than anticipated. In the fantasy world of Dino Riders, an evil intergalactic warlord named Krulos forces the peaceful humanoid species called the Valorians to go through a wormhole. They all end up on a prehistoric Earth, but the rivalry continues. The Valorians used to communicate with the dinosaurs in this prehistoric world telepathically, while the Rulons, led by Krulos, used brainwashing devices to control them. Now, both sides build a dinosaur army for the final battle, and the end result is as fierce as you can imagine. It's a tragedy that such a gem of a show lasted only a solitary season. Few things can be more entertaining than witnessing dinosaurs in full battle gear, equipped with advanced weapons and lasers as they take on the enemy. The designs for this show are amazing, and everything from the characters to the dinosaur armaments looks way ahead of its time. They mixed up dinosaurs from different eras, but you'll surely not be concerned about such technicalities in a show meant for children. The voice actors include some big names in the industry, and they do justice to the characters. The storytelling has a finesse that you'll appreciate, and many big-budget modern-day cartoons are not half as captivating as Dino Riders from the golden era of the 80s.
You shall receive the totem of the eagle.
Visionaries, Knights of the Magical Light, 1987. This was another instance of an animated series launched to promote a toy line, but the content quality didn't seem like a mere advertising effort. The story is premised in the planet Prismos that's trying to recover in the post-technological loss era. Two major groups rise in prominence, one led by the honest, law-abiding people of the planet and the other led by criminals. In this vicious battle for supremacy, a key role will be played by 14 knights who are empowered with magical energy and the ability to transform. It might be a big statement for a show that lasted only 13 episodes, but this is still among the finest cartoon shows during the 80s. The series opened with a fascinating pilot episode, and even though the overall concept used a tried and tested idea of pitting the good guys against the bad guys, the storytelling kept things exciting. The show was nicely animated, and there were some fun characters that you could root for. Of course, the narrative included plenty of jaw-dropping action, and the story had a lot more potential than being restricted to just one season.
High in the mountains, or deep in the sea.
Bionic VI. The story is premised in the near future, where Professor Amadeus Sharp manages to create a new form of technology. This invention augments humans through bionics, and he goes on to create the Bionic VI, a group of cyborg superheroes with some incredible powers. On the other hand, evil scientist Dr. Scarab intends to use bionic nanotech engineering to achieve immortality and dominance, and his henchmen meet with tough resistance from the Bionic VI. There are a few theme songs of cartoons in the 80s that get stuck in your head and refuse to leave. One such instance is the theme song of Bionic VI, which was just a tiny hint of the amazing show that was about to come. It was the perfect family show that could entertain adults along with the kids, and the stories touched upon subjects like family, unity, and working for a cause, which provided valuable lessons for children. The refreshing concept was helped by some impressive animation, and the well-designed characters had a depth that was rare to find in children's cartoons. If you watched and enjoyed the show as a child, you were privileged to grow up in the finest era of cartoons. DuckTales, 1987. DuckTales and characters like Donald Duck and Scrooge McDuck have been entertaining kids almost since the dawn of cartoons, and the 80s were no exception to their supremacy. This animated series featured the gallant adventures of billionaire Scrooge McDuck, who went on globe-trotting and treasure-hunting missions. Donald Duck had left his nephews Louie, Dewey, and Huey with him, and together they do everything from fun adventures to protecting his vast wealth from some notorious enemies. DuckTales is easily one of Disney's finest hours, and there are too many cool episodes that you can look back and enjoy, even today. Some of the episodes do get a bit too cheesy and silly, but you have to remember that the target audience of the show was pre-teen kids. The silliness and goofiness actually make the narrative entertaining, and the attitude of the different characters perfectly balance each other in the course of their numerous adventures. One of the most memorable moments in the show was during the miniseries where Scrooge and his nephews discovered lost cities of gold, and an exciting rogues gallery made things even more interesting. It's a timeless classic that needs to be appreciated, and it might still be worth revisiting some of the best episodes of the show. Alvin and the Chipmunks, 1983. Sometimes the most basic and underwhelming plots enjoy the longest run in cartoons, and Alvin and the Chipmunks is a great example. The show ran for 8 seasons and enjoyed a massive popularity among the kids despite being one of the simplest stories being aired during the time. It featured the antics of 3 chipmunk brothers, Simon, Alvin, and Theodore, who have been adopted by Dave. The young troublemakers often find themselves in tricky and unusual situations, and the episodes capture their exploits as they explore their childhood. Alvin and the Chipmunks is a classic cartoon show in every sense of the term. The simple narrative made sure to include some good plots every now and then, and the characters were so likable that one could watch them play around even if nothing thrilling was happening around them. The humor was crisp and omnipresent during the episodes, and the show was also blessed by some soulful, catchy music. The cast was perfectly suited for the roles, and the voice actors did a terrific job in bringing the characters to life. Overall, this brilliant cartoon classic shows just what's missing in the contemporary times and tells us why such content from the good old days needs to be brought back before it's too late. Chippendale Rescue Rangers, 1989. Animated shows have a long-standing love affair with squirrels and chipmunks, and the romance continues with yet another hidden gem from the 80s, Chippendale Rescue Rangers. It tells the story of two chipmunks, Chip and Dale, who have started a detective agency with their friends. The detectives may be tiny, but their intelligent minds are capable of greater things. Usually, their cases are petty, and ones that the police find too insignificant to handle. But they do have a couple of arch-rivals in the crazy scientist Norton Nimnol and Fat Cat. The adventures of the pint-sized crime fighters will keep your eyes glued to the screen, such is the strength of the narrative. The animation style has a hypnotic effect on the viewers, and the fluid usage of colors makes for a visual treat. The characters are well sketched, and their sharp movements make them seem lifelike in many ways. The hilarious personalities of Chip and Dale keep things light-hearted the whole time, and voice acting from talented artists like Corey Burton, Jim Cummings, and Tress MacNeille add more substance to the characters. The catchy background score, the addictive humor, and the inventive story arcs make sure that the show offers an unforgettable experience that stays with the viewer for decades.
It was a hidden village where tiny creatures lived. They call themselves Smurfs. They were good.
The Smurfs, 1981. This animated series offers a peek into the magical life of the tiny blue creatures, the Smurfs. They live in a peaceful enchanted forest, and their mushroom houses are absolutely adorable. However, these lovable creatures led by Papa Smurf have a challenge to their existence in the form of an evil wizard named Gargamel. His sinister plans include enslaving the Smurfs or making a meal out of them, and helped by his feline partner Azrael, the wizard has his eyes set on the riches of the Smurf colony. The tiny blue creatures must find a way to ward off the evil plans and keep them at bay so that their life continues to be peaceful and uninterrupted. For a show to enjoy as long as a run as the Smurfs, the content has to keep on evolving and adapting to suit the demands of the viewers. The show does that perfectly and draws in a substantial fan base who admires the rich animation style and the well-drawn characters. The catchy theme tune and fun background music add to the experience, and the simple story arcs often leave a deeper lesson for the viewers than you'd expect. It's exactly what cartoon shows should be like: simple, funny, and entertaining, with a touch of moral values. The exciting adventures of the Smurfs and the magical moments in the show make this one of our favorites from the 80s. Denver, The Last Dinosaur, 1988. Did you think dinosaurs had become extinct millions of years ago? Well, think again. This animated series tells the fascinating story of one of the last surviving dinosaurs, Denver, who was helped out of his fossilized egg by a group of teenagers from California. The young group of friends tries their best to keep his existence a secret, and they train Denver to go on various fun activities with them. However, there's a money-minded concert promoter named Morton Fizback who wants to utilize Denver for monetary gains. Can the teenagers protect their new friend from this shrewd villain? The show was fun and full of moral values that shaped kids into good human beings. The concept was imaginative, and a great storyline was the perfect recipe to get great ratings. The character voices were captivating, and there were some emotional moments that would tug at your heartstrings. The narrative captured the spirit of childhood bonding and friendship, and the show wouldn't have been as entertaining without some well-sketched characters. The dinosaur designs were flawless, and the overall animation quality was also considerably good. In short, Denver the Last Dinosaur didn't deserve to be cancelled as quickly as it did. And even computer-animated shows of today lack the promise of this underrated gem. Inhumanoids. 1986. This short and impactful animated series tells the story of a team of scientists who are conducting subterranean exploration. Their work is interrupted when monsters called Inhumanoids emerge from the ground and, helped by the evil human traitor Blackthorn, start waging a war against those dwelling on the surface. Now, the only things to save humanity from these evil monsters are some powerful allies who must give it their all to fight a superior force. Inhumanoids was quite scary and dark compared to some of the other cartoon shows of the time. The story never insulted the intelligence of the viewers and never worried about dumbing things down for the kids. In fact, it's believed that certain elements of the show were actually inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft, and the entire concept of ancient creatures and civilizations is derived from his terrifying creations. The animation style is so evolved that the show doesn't look like a cartoon from the 80s, and the action sequences shown in the series were simply crazy. You'll recognize some familiar voices because some of the voice actors also starred in shows like The Transformers and G.I. Joe, and what started as a way to promote a Hasbro toy line soon became one of the most appreciated animated series from the 80s. Mysterious Cities of Gold, 1982. The Mysterious Cities of Gold is set in 16th century South America. A young boy named Esteban is saved by Mendoza, a navigator on a Spanish ship from a devastating shipwreck. He wears a medal around his neck, which is also the only clue about his actual identity. He joins Mendoza on a voyage, and during the course of their journey, he meets two other kids, Tao and Zia, the former being the last member of an advanced race. While Esteban wants to know about his real identity, Zia wants to find her father, and Tao is seeking the remaining survivors of his race. All the clues point them to the 7 cities of gold, and a massive treasure hunt is also going to give them some sought-after personal answers. It wouldn't be an overstatement to say that the mysterious Cities of Gold is among the most thrilling and engaging cartoon shows that you'll encounter. The rich storyline is designed like a grand epic, and the entire cast is spectacular and talented enough to pull off the challenging characters. The stories are told from a child's perspective, but they never cease to amaze you. The premise of an interesting period in history makes things exciting, and a captivating musical score blends in perfectly with the narrative. It's a show that was way ahead of its time, and it's insane to think that such brilliance was cancelled after the first season. The Scooby and ScrappyDoo Puppy Hour, 1982. Everyone's familiar with the mystery-solving dog Scooby-Doo and his fearful partner Shaggy, but not many are aware of this mini-animated series that released during the 80s. This updated version of the classic Hanna-Barbera cartoon series focuses on the adventures of Fred, Shaggy, Velma, Daphne, and Scooby, with an added twist in the form of Scooby's pint-sized hot-headed nephew, ScrappyDoo. They continue to bump into ghosts and monsters, which are mostly faked by criminals, but the addition of ScrappyDoo always made things interesting. Many Scooby-Doo fans aren't too fond of the loud and annoying little dog ScrappyDoo, but we beg to differ. Yes, he often got overboard with his antics, but the fact that he was an exact opposite of his uncle made the show fun to watch. This was probably an addition to entertain children, but what hurt more than the change introduced was the disappointing animation quality. The backgrounds lacked the fluidity required to make it stand out, and to make matters worse, some of the storylines were far too dull to become memorable. All in all, this new attempt was at best mediocre, and the poor response probably made it short-lived, but it's still worth trying out if you're seeking a variety in the usual Scooby-Doo lore. The New Adventures of Johnny Quest, 1986. The familiar story is back in a new avatar, and Dr. Quest is back to relive his adventurous side yet again. He tags along with his group to embark on new adventures, and the bad guys keep coming to interrupt his journey. The likes of Dr. Zinn, the mad scientist, and many other such psychos have to be dealt with, but it's nothing that the genius of Dr. Quest can't handle. This animated series is presented as a continuation of the original 1964-65 series, and this is probably where the show faltered. Sometimes, when a show tries to recreate the magic of the original, it fails because the shoes are simply too big to fill. Something similar happened with the New Adventures of Johnny Quest, which paled in comparison to the original. However, individually, this still stood as a terrific series, and even the animation was far superior to the original. The showrunners got Don Messick to do the Doctor's voice yet again, and the stories, while simplistic, had the potential to grow into something bigger. The initial plan was to go ahead with 39 episodes, but following the poor ratings, the show got cancelled. We never got to see the developments in the story that were intended, and the series became another of the wasted opportunities from the studios.
Wait here, Piglet.
The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, 1988. The legendary Winnie the Pooh has been popular among kids for decades, and yet, somehow, the 80s animated series featuring the adorable bear went largely unnoticed. The episodes featured the adventures of Winnie and his friends, and the childish stories also have some touching moments. Piglet's loneliness, or Piglet wishing to be taller, were deeper subjects that could still resonate with the kids, and this symbolized the true success of the show. This might not have been on the radar for the teenagers, but kids had a gala time watching the antics of these hilarious speaking animals. The humor is subtle and nicely punctuated in the stories, and the show probably had the most kid-friendly vibe among all the other ones airing at the time. The background music would get the kids grooving to it, and the entire narrative was packed like a sitcom suitable for young viewers. This animated series has the potential to get you through a long, hard day, even today, and there's really nothing better to unwind than some good old childhood nostalgia. Dennis the Menace, 1986. This young boy is a troublemaker, and the story of how the comics came together is really inspiring. The creator of Dennis was simply influenced by a neighborhood kid, and his thoughts and humor put together a character that's celebrated even today. Dennis the Menace was released in 1986, and the narrative picked up from the extensive comic book lore. The 6-year-old Dennis is known for his notorious antics that keep his parents and neighbors on their toes, and this time, he's accompanied by his friends and his dog, rough. This animated series comprised of multiple short stories packed within each episode, and this ensured that the viewers could enjoy some light-hearted comedy without getting too invested. It stayed true to the source material, and the animation quality was surprisingly good for the time. There were some really impressive story arcs, and the episodes where Dennis would go on adventures with his friends were the coolest of them all. The show was also blessed to have some exceptional voice talents, such as the late Phil Hartman, and the voices were perfectly suited for the characters. If you want a taste of some childhood innocence packed with slapstick comedy, this is the show to watch out for.
Somebody's coming!
The Littles, 1983. The Littles was based on characters from children's novels by John Peterson, and the animated series focused on the life of a 13-year-old boy named Henry Big. While he's on a vacation, he discovers tiny creatures called the Littles in his suitcase, and there's an entire family of them. The episodes took us through the diverse dynamics of the Little family, their adolescent children growing up with unique personality traits, and the adventures in their tiny world. The Littles might have been a cartoon show meant for the kids, but the attention to detail was astonishing. For instance, every time the scene focused on the points of view of the little creatures, everything else was made to be gigantic in proportion. Besides, the narrative had the luxury of playing around with multiple characters, none of whom were similar in nature. This automatically introduced a subtle element of comedy, and the crisp and clean animation was visually appealing. In many ways, the show was inspired by The Borrowers, but the originality of the content couldn't be questioned. Eventually, The Littles might not be the finest cartoon show around, but it certainly could be counted among the better children's shows of that era. The Adventures of the Galaxy Rangers, 1986. This futuristic animated series is set sometime after the year 2086, and two aliens from a distant planet travel to Earth. They seek allies to fight the expansionist Crown Empire, and in return for the assistance, the aliens would provide humanity with a hyperdrive device for future developments. This marked a landmark event in human history, and interstellar travel boomed with new colonies emerging across the universe. However, criminal activities were also growing, and the group of extraterrestrial affairs was assigned to be the protectors. These Galaxy Rangers and their unique missions formed the core of the episodes, and it was sci-fi adventure at its finest. Animated shows on TV sometimes reward mediocrity, and the lack of a proper toy line or action figures often takes away the interest from genuinely impressive shows. The Adventures of the Galaxy Rangers fell victim to the lack of marketing gimmick, but people seem to ignore the unique concept and the intelligent storytelling. It could have lasted much longer, and it had the potential to become a cult classic, but the interest just wasn't there among the fans. It was fun to watch cowboys and ordinary people casually dealing in spaceships and robots, and the characters were far more believable than the usual cartoon protagonists. Finally, it remained a hidden gem that only a select few know about, but if you're among the rare group, then you should count yourself lucky.
Fly so high.
The Adventures of Teddy Ruxpin, 1986. Haven't we all fantasized about going treasure hunting with a friend as a child? The Adventures of Teddy Ruxpin captures this adorable childish desire and gives it a nice story. A young 15-year-old boy, Teddy Ruxpin, leaves his home with his best friend Grubby after finding an ancient map. This map is supposed to lead them to the priceless collection of crystals, and the two friends take the help of Dr. Newton Gimmick to utilize the magical powers of the ancestral treasure. Of course, they're not alone, and an evil organization, Marvo, is also after their lives. What follows is a nail-biting adventure that you simply can't miss. The series had a relatively successful run for 65 episodes, and the release, along with the popular Teddy Ruxpin toy line, ensured high ratings. The heart of the narrative was the protagonist, a wholesome and likable character who you immediately start rooting for. The mystery keeps thickening the plot, and you'd be quickly invested in the adventures of the young boy and his friend. There were some creepy villains from Marvo, aka the Monsters and Villains organization, and clashes between the colorful characters were quite memorable. The show also had some heartfelt moments, such as when Teddy returned home and reunited with his family. In short, this visually stunning animated series deserves to be popularized even today, because such content is a rarity in today's time.
They were called Dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs, 1987. Welcome to the world of intelligent, anthropomorphic dinosaurs and other prehistoric species. The series focuses on the feud between dinosaurs and their opposing clan, the evil Tyrannos. The Dinosaurs are helped by 4 human allies called the Secret Scouts, and both groups are armed to the teeth in this deadly battle. While the Dinosaurs reside in the dormant volcanoes of Lava Dome, the Tyrannos settle under a tar pit, and both groups plan attacks against each other from their hideouts. There can be nothing better than watching 2 warring groups of enhanced dinosaurs, and the premise alone won the hearts of the viewers. The characters had really cool appearances, and the humor was always plentiful. Genghis Rex was an underrated animated villain, and his presence commanded respect and evoked laughter at the same time. It might come across as cheesy for some, but as children, this is exactly the kind of content that we thrived on. A toy line was planned, but things never materialized, and the lack of promotions bogged down the show. Like many other promising shows during the 80s, Dinosaurs couldn't stand the test of time, and even though 65 episodes were made for the first run, things ended only after 1 season. Count Duckula, 1988. Count Dracula might be terrifying and intimidating, but Count Duckula is a far cry from the terrifying villain. After all, he's a vegetarian vampire duck, as ironic as that might sound. He lives in a castle along with his servants and his evil butler, Igor. The butler constantly tries to change the vegetarian Duckula to his evil version. But before he can turn to his dark side, there looms a threat from a notorious vampire hunter who seeks to slay the innocent Count. Not many cartoon shows during the 80s thrived in dark humor, but Count Duckula is an exception. The show was backed up by an interesting storyline, and during the course of events, there always emerged a few hilarious yet tricky situations. The writing is witty, and it's reflected in the dialogues, especially the lines belonging to Count Duckula. It's always amusing to see a version of Dracula who hates the sight of blood and loves his greens. The show opens with a classic intro song, and the clever plots always kept the attention of the viewers. The animation style is unique and captures the true essence of the storytelling. If you're seeking some harmless fun, you can always count on the vegetarian Count Duckula. The Super Mario Bros. Super Show, 1989. You can rarely go wrong with the adventures of Mario, and the popular video game has been captured in this wonderful animated series. It features the familiar story of the plumber brothers Mario and Luigi, as they accidentally get sucked into the bathtub pipeline and end up in the mysterious Mushroom Kingdom. Here, they have to join forces with Princess Toadstool and her friends against the tyrant King Koopa, who also has plans of destroying the other worlds. Many seem to believe this to be the first animated appearance of Mario, but they're unaware of an obscure show in the early 80s that briefly explored his adventures. However, Mario wasn't a big hit until 1985, and this version of the show simply turned the tides in favor of the character being immortalized. The animation was quite appropriate, except for a few minor technical errors, but the flaws could be easily overlooked courtesy of some terrific voice actors. There were brief live-action sequences in between, which featured cameos from celebrities, and for many, this was the first introduction to the heroic plumber. Overall, this can be considered a wholesome cartoon show that can be enjoyed by people across all age groups, and not many future adaptations could replicate what this series achieved. Mighty Orbots, 1984. Premised in a futuristic world, this show explores the threats to Earth, primarily from an evil organization called Shadow. A cybernetic Lord Umbra leads the group, and the only protection for the Earth against this formidable force comes from the Galactic Patrol. Robert Simmons is a timid young scientist, but he secretly fights as the leader of the Orbots, which are a team of intelligent robots that help humanity in this fight. Each of these robots has some unique quality, and Robert utilizes them as per his requirement, even combining to form a giant robot when the need arises. We can say this without a shred of doubt that Mighty Orbots is one of the most underrated cartoon shows to have been released during the 80s. The story arcs were tricky at times and would keep you guessing, and the subtle animation made it look ahead of its time. The characters weren't over the top, which made it easy for the viewers to relate to them, and the music captured the best of rock and roll. It was slightly irritating to have an announcer explain everything unnecessarily, but this was only a minor flaw against so much going in favor of the show. Eventually, this intriguing series was taken off because of a lawsuit by the creators of the GoBots action figures, and it's unfortunate how business tricks and competition ruined a great show. Jace and the Wheeled Warriors, 1985. Jace and the Wheeled Warriors takes place in a fantasy world where magic and technology coexist. An accidental scientific invention by Ordric creates a monstrous form of plant creatures called monster mines that wreak havoc across the planet. In order to counter this threat, Ordric creates the Magic Root, a plant capable of destroying the monster mines. However, the magic root got divided into two parts, and one half remained with Ordric's son, Jace. He joined a team of fighters to go on a deadly quest that would help him find his father, and also enable him to put the two pieces of magic root together. If we had $1 for every time a worthy animated series was taken down prematurely, we'd be living the good life. This wonderful mix of sci-fi and fantasy was enabled by a gritty and well-knit plot, and everything about the narrative was truly unique. There were lots of action and adventure on offer, and the viewers could also appreciate some quality animation. It had a phenomenal theme song, and it can still be one of the best workout songs today. The voice acting was in good hands, and it's simply ridiculous how such a gem of a show could go off air after only 65 episodes. If only such animated series could enjoy a longer run, then the 80s golden era would have been admired even more. My Little Pony, 1984. What happens when a human gets to interact with a magical world? Well, a solid children's cartoon show, for starters. My Little Pony tells the story of a young girl named Megan who finds herself in the world of magical ponies. Their adventures are memorable, and the episodes explore their fun times together. It would be harsh to judge a cartoon intended for toddlers and young kids through the eyes of an adult. My Little Pony might not have had complicated plot lines, but it made lunchtime a lot easier for thousands of kids. If you watch the show today, it'd probably remind you of Dragon Tales because of the calming effect that the episodes have on you. The show was mostly targeted toward young girls, but many of the guys liked it just the same. There were some memorable storylines, a few catchy musical numbers, and the diverse range of characters was a joy to watch. The show also had certain educational elements, and you simply don't get too many of these complete cartoons anymore. Rambo, The Force of Freedom, 1986. Rambo movies had already taken the 80s by storm, and it was high time for an animated series to thrive in its popularity. This animated show takes you on another deadly mission assigned to John Rambo by Colonel Troutman. He leads a special forces unit to fight the terrorist organization Savage, which is working all over the world. Rambo and his team of brave warriors are the last chance to break the backbone of this sinister organization and restore normalcy. The best thing about the Rambo animated series is the loyalty to the original source material. It never made an effort to tone things down too much, although you surely can't expect him to blow people up. One of the highlights of this series was the wide variety of modern weapons on show. People were awestruck by the sight of the AC-130 Spectre gunship, a modified MiG-21, and even the space shuttle. The animation quality was pretty decent, and it was a nice way for the young ones to familiarize themselves with the incredible franchise. Was it among the best of 80s cartoon shows? It certainly wasn't, but there is always a special room for the ones with guilty pleasure. Turbo Teen, 1984. There were no defined boundaries for the concepts behind some of the 80s cartoon shows, and this allowed the stories to take a wild turn every once in a while. Turbo Teen, for instance, was a show about a young teenager, Brett Matthews, who could transform into a car. It all started after he met with a road accident and crashed into a secret government laboratory. A strange molecular beam caused him and his sports car to become one fused entity, and he could morph into the car every time he was exposed to extreme heat. Extreme cold, on the other hand, transformed him back to his human form. Enabled with this new superpower, he goes on a crime-fighting spree along with his girlfriend, and his adventures mark the memorable episodes of the show. You may like it or hate it, but you have to give credit for thinking outside the box. A young boy changing into a car is simply too outrageous, and to weave a concrete storyline around it is pure genius. The show was clearly inspired from the Transformers, but you wouldn't care about the influence when you experience such thorough entertainment. Ridiculous things would happen during some of the episodes, such as the boy turning into a car after eating a spicy sausage. But if you don't limit your imagination, you'll have a blast with this one. The tales of this human transformer weren't exactly a massive hit, and eventually the show got cancelled after the first season. Heathcliff and the Cadillac Cats, 1984. The show largely focused on the hilarious misadventures of the feline troublemaker who got into all sorts of tricky situations. It all started after a local godfather moved into his neighborhood and made Heathcliff work for him. Thus began an unending saga of trouble, and the stories featured him trying to get out of the mess. The second part of each episode featured the Cadillac Cats and their unique adventures. Who doesn't love a tender cartoon series with a hint of adventure? Heathcliff and the Cadillac Cats had the perfect package, and the quality content was further boosted by some really strong writing. The performances from the voice actors were also top grade, and the show could be deceptively addictive. We still remember the opening sequence and the theme song that was catchy as hell, and a bunch of likable characters made the show as lively as it was. Overall, it might have been a cartoon intended for children, but the adults also enjoyed the abundance of unadulterated fun on offer. The World of David the Gnome, 1985. This was a Spanish animated series that found many takers in the US as well. The show portrayed a kind and adorable side of the gnomes, the tiny 6-inch creatures. The stories featured various types of gnomes and their lives and lore. While these tiny beings wanted to live in peace and harmony, they were often troubled by the trolls, the malevolent creatures of the forest. The show captures the exploits of David, a friendly gnome doctor, and his wife Lisa, as they exist hidden from the human eye, trying to protect the defenseless creatures. This obscure show features on our list because of the emotional quotient of the series. The narrative was captivating, and through the daily life of the gnomes, the episodes also taught us some valuable lessons. There were some really touching moments, such as the time when David and his wife released their pet fox into the wild. It remains a special part of our childhood that simply can't be replaced, even with the advent of breathtaking animation and high-tech complicated shows. Danger Mouse, 1981. You know it's a great show when it runs for 10 seasons straight, and Danger Mouse often doesn't get the credit that it deserves. It's about the finest secret agent in the world, Danger Mouse, who follows the orders of Colonel K and takes up the trickiest missions. He has the responsibility of saving the world from monsters and other dangerous criminals, and Danger Mouse is basically a cartoon version of James Bond with a twist. The best thing about the show is that watching it now makes it more entertaining than it was as a child. This means that the content was evergreen, and there was hardly a foot wrong from the showrunners. The animation quality will leave you spellbound, especially the abundance of vibrant colors, and the scripts and story arcs will put a smile on your face. The show is also blessed by some remarkable voice actors, such as David Jason, and he stole the show as the titular character. There are some memorable characters, many of whom offer a few hilarious moments, and you simply can't get over this laugh riot quickly. There was indeed no time like the 80s, especially if you're a fan of animated shows. Do let us know in the comments below about your favorite ones from our list, and also feel free to tell us about some others that we may not have mentioned. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us. If you haven't already, have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.
What's that? It's getting louder.